Mobilization webinar series. This is number 4 in the series. If you're keeping track, this is actually the third one. We had to delay the Indigenous engagement webinar, which was supposed to be number 3. That's actually happening next week. So please register for that and attend that one as well. These webinars are presented by the Global Water Futures Knowledge Mobilization team. This one is a special event. We've partnered with the communications team to deliver this webinar today. And maybe, Shawn, you can just introduce yourself quickly.
Hi. Am I coming through?
You are. I've got a caller who needs to mute your line.
Okay. Hi, I'm Shawn Reibling. I work on the GWF comms team, and I'm based at Wilfrid Laurier University.
Awesome. Okay, so just a few things. Today we do like to record these webinars. We do make them available online on the KM page. So everyone, please be on their best behavior. We do want this to be interactive as possible. Sorry, I was just going to say, please enter comments or questions you have in the chat window. We just have one from Mustafa who's saying he can't hear anything. Is anyone else having audio problems? But we want this chat window to be open, so if you have any questions during the webinar, please put it in there. If you need any clarification, that's really how we would like to interact at this point. It's also nice to put things, ideas for other webinars or any follow-up you might want to see. That the chat box is the best way to do that. Because the next point is it would be really nice if people could mute their lines so we don't get a lot of feedback. Shauna is working on turning off all her notifications. But yeah, just trying to keep the background noise to a minimum if you can, because we'd like to try to deliver this in as high quality as possible. To start, I have a list of participants. You guys can probably flick that up as well, but it's nice to know who's on the line. So if everyone could just say hi in the chat box, it'd be nice to kind of get a little dialogue going as well. At the end of this, we will distribute an email to everyone. Typically, we have follow-up surveys, just about how this went, what we can do to improve, and what other webinars you guys would like to see. Yeah, so I think that's about it. So we'll get started. I guess I didn't introduce myself. I'm Andrew Spring. I am the Knowledge Mobilizer at Wilfrid Laurier University. So we do have an all Laurier presentation today. But I think myself and Shauna, we work together well, both on KM and communication stuff. And the highlight, or I guess the theme of today is really about what are the differences and the similarities between kind of communications and KM? And I know a lot of people get a little confused about what these are and what they do. So we're hopefully going to provide a little bit of clarity on that today and really talk about how these, I guess, two notions can work together to help you, and you being projects, being HQP, being researchers, better get your message out there, better build relationships, and help you towards mobilizing your knowledge and research. There we go. We do want this to be as interactive as possible as well. We do have some audience participation in these webinars. We use something called Poll Everywhere. For some of you who have been on this before, you can see that there's a way of interacting with these polls via the web through the web link there, but also you can use a phone and text to text GWFKM to that number. I think what happens is it'll give you a response, and then you're in the system. So when we ask questions, you just text to that number, and your response will show up in the window. So why are we here? Always a good question. We're here because of Global Water Futures. Okay, so this is a Global Water Futures project, and part of under that, I guess we're all part of that in some way. Global Water Futures is the largest research, water-related research project there is out there right now. $78 million of funding through what's called the CFREF, the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. It's a huge network of researchers, over 152 researchers at 15 universities, international partners, Canadian partners. It's a huge network. We're doing a lot of really great stuff. And then really at the end of the day, we're trying to deliver risk management solutions to water teachers in Canada and around the world, okay, in response to changing climate. Sorry, I'm just too many windows open. It gets kind of confusing. So Global Water Futures is broken up into 40 projects across Canada. 12 of them are called Pillar 3 projects, which really focus on creating solutions for end users. So some of them are listed right there. Those are the ones that really have a heavy knowledge mobilization focus. And recently we've just announced 6 new projects that were co-created with Indigenous communities. So again, it's a really big project made into smaller projects that kind of cover the country and have a lot of international linkages. So knowledge mobilization is a core mandate of Global Water Futures, okay, and all CFREF projects. The ability to mobilize, oh my gosh, I'm sorry guys. The ability to mobilize knowledge for the benefit of society and the economy is a defining characteristic of the entire Global Water Futures program. Okay, so we want to make all this cutting edge research that is happening available to the governments, communities, and end users, so we can implement strategies and practices to deal with these upcoming risks. So you guys would have heard, at all the meetings that we've had about the importance of KM. We brought that up as part of this series on many occasions. And this whole webinar series is about delivering you guys a bit more information about what KM is and what some of these tools are that you can use to better get your knowledge in the hands of people who need it. Okay. So today's webinar, we're going to deal with the concept of science communication and knowledge mobilization. Okay. And sorry, I'm going to get a little today. I apologize. There's a little bit of confusion out there as to what these two concepts are and what they do. Okay, and we're not here to say one is better than the other or which one you should be using all the time. We're here to tell you that these concepts are linked and that they work together really well, and these tools are available to everyone within the network to help you guys mobilize your knowledge to the users. So we just wanted to start with some of this live polling. Start to understand what you guys understand what communications are, and go from there to figure out what knowledge that you have about these concepts and where we need to kind of work on going forward. So this is where this live polling should come in. So it'll be wonderful. Stephanie Merrill, can you provide me a little bit of information here? The question is, what does communications mean to you? And it appears as if our live polling is having some problems today. If you guys can just start putting some of this information into the chat box, that would be great. Sorry about this, everybody. This is one of the problems that we have with this every once in a while, is that it doesn't always work when we want to. Dissemination, excellent. If this did work, you would be seeing a pretty amazing word cloud at this point, but I guess you can only visualize what this might look like. Okay, I'm going to put it to the next one. The second follow-up question was going to be about what knowledge mobilization means to you. And I know we've done this on a few occasions, but it'd be really neat to kind of see what KM means versus what communication means, so we can get a better understanding of I guess what some people think about what the problems are. Fanny, you raised your hand. Can you please insert your question into the chat box? Okay. Can everyone see the chat box and things that are kind of happening in the chat box? Fanny has raised his hand. Can you enter your question in the chat box, please, Fanny? All right. I apologize for some technical difficulties here. This is not always what we had planned.
Andrew, it's Stephanie here. I was just looking at the poll everywhere. I'm not sure how to fix it. I think it's related to the app connection to your PowerPoint presentation, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. So we tried. Anyway,
the chat box is people are submitting stuff there. So.
Yep. That's what we'll have to do for now. Sure. All right. Thanks, everyone. And again, apologies. Webinars always seem to go sideways for some reason. Shauna, do you want to jump in with any of these things? The differences you're seeing?
Sure. It looks like Fanny said he just had a technical glitch on his side. A lot of people are talking about sharing of information using different mediums for a targeting audience. Thanks, Mark. That's perfect. And a lot of people are talking about the flow of information when they refer to communications.
Awesome. So, right. So when we're talking about these concepts, I tend to think about communications as a one-way flow. I tend to think of knowledge mobilization as maybe a two-way discussion that happens. Okay. Shauna, anything else?
No, go ahead.
I thought you would actually have some words now.
Oh, okay. In terms of communications and knowledge mobilization, there seems to be overlap between them, and that's okay. Figuring out the difference between them is great, but knowing when to use each one as part of your toolkit for what you want to achieve, I think is really important. And that's why I think communications and knowledge mobilization work well together, because they're basically tools in your toolkit for achieving the aims you want. People were talking about reaching policymakers or getting current information into the hands of people that make decisions. And you're right, that's the point. We're all working towards the same goal, and these are just different tools to use.
Awesome. So building up to this webinar, I kind of put this out on Twitter. Twitter is one of the tools that I use to connect with people and have conversations about work and research online. And I threw this out about a week ago, and Audrey Giles responded with the former is telling people what you found, the latter is putting it into action to create.
Oh, I can hear them.
And I thought that was an excellent,
I just turned mine off.
An excellent description of what that is. Right? So again, communications, we're talking to people about what we do, we're talking to people about why it's important, but knowledge mobilization is more about the relationships and the trust that makes that knowledge usable. Okay? So again, when we think of KM, and we've talked about KM on multiple occasions, we tend to really kind of focus on what we call best practices. You know, having meetings with knowledge users at the outset to develop, you know, research projects that work for them. You know, building relationships and linkages about, you know, building all sorts of knowledge products. Okay, so we tend to really kind of focus on some of these really big events or kind of objectives that take actually a lot of time to build. Okay, so none of these are easy to do. Okay, they're usually products of years of relationships and communication and back and forth, and all of that. And we had a lot of questions on early webinars that really focused on looking, well, how do we do this? Like, where do we start? How do we do this? And really, we wanted to talk about KM more as a spectrum and a process than just something we kind of sit down around a table and all do. Okay? Because it's not quite as easy as that. So all of our global water futures projects fit somewhere into the spectrum. Okay? So, like the Indigenous co-creation, we picture to be much heavily on the co-creation side. Our pillar threes fit more on that kind of co-creation side because really they're working with partners to create this knowledge that partners need to adapt to some of these changes that we're seeing. And even some of our projects that don't have KM written into their mandate, they do fit somewhere on the spectrum, okay? And that's just in those activities they do, the relationships they built, they are building, and even the communications projects or products and outputs that they're doing, okay? It's all very valuable stuff. Communication, again, helps us put that out into the world, and knowledge mobilization helps us create that knowledge together and make that into something, okay? So think of it again as the spectrum of saying, you know, we can start with some basic things, and then we can keep, I guess, building these connections and building these relationships, so we can get to, you know, to this spot of co-creation or closer to that co-creation, and where we're mobilizing knowledge to really kind of make a difference. So what we want to really kind of say from both the KM perspective and the comms team perspective is that there's a lot of different tools available to push all of the projects, but not only the projects, but your own personal research towards this co-creation or up through the ladder of knowledge mobilization. So if the question is, where do we start? This is a really good it's a really good slide that kind of captures a lot of that. And again, this came out of well, I'll give full props to one of the projects that tweeted this at me as well. But this is something that Shirk has put out about kind of what these steps are towards co-creation, right? So we really start with this dissemination, and it lists a whole bunch of tools that you can use to help get your research out there. You know, websites, papers, presentations, all that stuff. And then we kind of go into this model of exchange, where this one-way dialogue turns into two-way dialogue. And then further up the ladder, you get people who can connect this information with the people who need to use it. And that's kind of, again, that's where knowledge mobilization really starts to kick in. And then we get towards this knowledge mobilization, okay? So again, it's not something you can just say, well, here's my knowledge mobilization plan, like, let's do it. It's something that we really have to build towards. And, you know, what we wanted to communicate a lot today is saying that there's tools that are more, I guess, more communications tools that help you guys get on the spectrum. And then there's things that you can do to push you up the spectrum towards where we all want to be. And that means in terms of, for knowledge mobilization and co-creation of research and projects. So KM is most effective when groups of people with different roles work together, okay? So we talked about communications and the communications groups. We talked about these knowledge brokers. Institutions have staff for communications as well that aren't associated with Global Water Futures projects. Researchers, all sorts of people are part of your team that are part of this process in moving KM or moving your research up the ladder through KM. And that's really because people have different skill sets. Okay? There's some people who are really dynamic researchers, and there's some people who work better with people. And there's some people who know the partners better than you do. And it's working together with a lot of these different stakeholders or just different team members to really push your research up through that spectrum of knowledge mobilization. So if we think about who is part of our team, and this is going to be a bit different for everyone, but let's think about Global Water Futures. Global Water Futures has given us so many resources to help us not only do this research, but communicate and mobilize this research. And at the project level, we have project managers, we have researchers, we have all sorts of people, again, who can help you, and you being all sorts of different people on this list, better mobilize your knowledge and your research. Institutions have a stake in this as well, right? We are all Global Water Futures researchers who have a Global Water Futures project who are at an institution that does care about the research that you do as well and is interested in communicating that research out and helping you build linkages. Every one of you is part of a research group as well, and they have their own needs and partners and strategies to help communicate and build those relationships. Okay, and then further down, individual researchers and HQP or YP, whatever you want to call them. I know probably most of you on the call would fit into that HQP and YP demographic, and that's great because you're looking to kind of build these relationships and build these skills so you can better communicate your research as well and build your profile and your research as well. But just know that it's not you're not working here in isolation. There are different groups all up and down this ladder who can be part of your communications team and part of your knowledge mobilization team, and really kind of give you the skills and the platform to help communicate your research. So again, we're really talking about where do we start, okay? So we all have this goal of knowledge mobilization. That's where we want to be. But a lot of the questions start with, well, what do I do first? And where do I go? And really what we wanted to focus on a lot today, particularly with Shawn here on the webinar, was around this dissemination of knowledge as like the first rung in the ladder, or the first part of the journey towards knowledge mobilization. And I think this is where I turn over to you for a bit there, Shawn.
Okay, I've taken my mute off. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, next slide, please.
Oh, sorry. Got that. Sorry.
Yes, you're driving, Andrew. I'm just the backseat driver. So the most important thing to take away from this slide is to use a communication tool to begin a relationship that knowledge mobilization sustains. And on the left, we have a picture of Arniston's ladder of citizen participation, if you want to look it up. And it talks about the concepts that Andrew mentioned, where you start from just telling people things and talking at them, and moving more towards consultation and forward to citizen control. And communication can help you through up this ladder. I also just want to give a brief note about if you work with CIHR researchers at all, when they talk about knowledge mobilization, they talk about ongoing and end of grant knowledge mobilization, and they break that down into raising awareness and promoting action. And I think raising awareness is something that communications tools can do and help you with, and promoting action goes back to what the people on Twitter sent to Andrew. Action is really a strong component of knowledge mobilization. So CIHR takes these concepts of communication and knowledge mobilization and forces them together to show that it's a process. You can move on a spectrum or a ladder between communications and knowledge mobilization. I notice you're on here, Mark, too, so feel free to make comments. Next slide, please. Communicating your research. It is important but often overlooked. I know that everyone is busy doing their research, and there's a lot of expectations of people involved in these projects and graduate students, but communicating your research is important. And it's more than conference presentations and academic papers, and I'll get into that in a minute. It's about making your research more available and accessible, and it's a skill you need to learn and practice. Next slide, please. Paul Jones mentioned he was having trouble hearing me. Can you hear me now, Paul? I'm putting on my big teacher voice. So why do communications in knowledge mobilization? It's good for you, it's good for the project, it's good for the university, and it's good for end users. Next slide, please. So what is communications? Everyone has a basic understanding of talking to people or communicating in that way, but there's actually a theory behind it to explain how it happens. On the left-hand side, there's a sender who has a message, who sends it to the recipient through a channel. So that channel could be written work, it could be Twitter, it could be anything. And in order for the message to get from the sender to the recipient, it needs to be encoded and decoded through the channel. So why is that important? If you've ever played the game of telephone, you know that messages can get garbled every time they move around, so through the channel. When they're encoded, they could be garbled up, or when they're decoded, they could be garbled up. So the language and the choices that you make in the message you're trying to get across really need to keep this in mind and to be as clear as you can be. As well, on the lower right-hand side of this slide, there's a call to action. So once the sender sends the message to the recipient, how do you know they've actually received it? Especially if you're sending your message to a large group of people and you're not doing maybe a one-on-one communication. You don't have that person nodding to say, yes, I understand what you said. So your communications can have a call to action in it that gives the sender feedback that the message was understood. And we'll show you some examples. Next slide. I'm just pausing to see if anybody has any questions, and I don't think so. So the next example here is the GWF e-newsletter. It is a one-to-many form of communication. So Mark puts it together with communications input from all the different universities, and it's sent out to the list. All the institutions are highlighted. Opportunities are communicated to promote sharing, and there's a call to action like a click link to read story details all throughout the newsletter. So if you're looking at postdoc opportunities, they can see whether or not things have clicked and that sort of thing. So when people sign up for this newsletter and the newsletter goes out, we want to know what the call to actions are effective or not. And where does the newsletter go? Who's on the list? This helps us shape the message so that it is interpreted clearly or the way we want it to be interpreted. So we know that the locations of the readers are mostly in North America and is consistent with having an internal audience. So the people that are involved in the GWF project read the e-newsletter. That's important. You'll notice in the last e-newsletter, I think it was, the upcoming annual general meeting was front and center. That is a message that would resonate with an internal audience. There's a bi-monthly distribution, and analytics have now shown that more frequent, shorter newsletters result in more clicks. Therefore, the newsletter will be moving towards a monthly format. So I mentioned clicks and analytics. The last newsletter was very long, and we apologize for that. Mark's apologizing here. But the important part to note from this, and what Mark checks in the analytics is, if your newsletter is very long, your key messages are closer to the bottom. People have to work for them. They have to scroll down your screen to get to your message. So it is a good problem to have that much content, but some of your messages may not be getting through because of the noise of scrolling down. So the analytics that are built into the newsletter showed this, so now we're changing the format. So the call to action has given the sender feedback, and now we can change to make our message more effective. Mark also mentioned that 500 people signed up at the AGU over the past 2 years to receive the newsletter. So that's important to note because we know that people who attend AGU are interested in the information of GWF. So when the newsletter goes out, we keep those people who are reading the newsletter who attended AGU in mind. Next slide, please.
Well, I was just going to add a few comments there.
Yeah.
So from a communications perspective, it's a good way of updating like a broad audience about kind of what the project's been doing, and here are some highlights and how they can be involved. From a knowledge mobilization perspective, okay, it can help keep people in the loop. It can help just update people on projects. But remember, like, Global Water Futures has the e-news. Some individual projects also have newsletters. You know, the universities has newsletters, and a lot of this content actually overlaps as well. So what we're trying to make available is a broad way of keeping a lot of people engaged. Okay, but it's not the only tool that we need to have in our toolbox to keep partners engaged. Okay, I do enjoy a good newsletter from time to time, but you can look at the analytics and you can actually see the amount of people who are opening these newsletters. For some of them, it's about 50%. I think that's a pretty good average. So it's not reaching all the people that you would like it to reach. So from a KM perspective, we want to make sure that we could go in and like use the information that's part of this, but connect with our end users in different ways to convey that same information. Okay. So again, a newsletter is great, but from a KM perspective, we want to make sure that we're kind of following up. For new partners, we can always send people the newsletters. I know they're all archived, just so they're aware of all the wonderful things that the projects are doing, right? All right, throw it back to you, Shawn.
I'm just waiting for the little mute thing to come off. Thank you for doing that.
Sure.
The newsletter is not meant to do knowledge mobilization. You're completely correct. It's meant to have a baseline. And if you want to have someone just have the baseline awareness that the project is going on, then that's good as well. As well, the links that are in the newsletter are picked specifically. So if people want to know more about, say, the Northern Water Futures Project, there's a link in there that goes deep into that website, so people can find out more deeply about what's going on in that project, not just that one link in the newsletter. So it's an open door. It's an invitation for more things to go on. Videos. Videos are becoming a very popular way to share information online. Apparently will account for 80% of all internet traffic by 2020. Wow. If you just think about that, only 20% of it will be things that people read. So video is becoming more and more important. We could probably talk here all day about digital storytelling, but in terms of communications, using digital technologies to tell your story is an effective way to engage people in the message you want to communicate to them. You can talk about why your research is important in these videos and demonstrate what you do in a way that maybe more static communications tools don't demonstrate. But again, it's another tool in your toolbox to build relationships.
Yeah, and just quickly again from, you know, I know McMaster University does a lot of this work, and at Laurier we've been doing a lot of this work as well, to give our HQP the skills to do digital storytelling as a way of, again, communicating their research. If this is, I guess, the medium that the audience wants to have, then providing our researchers with the skills to do that therefore becomes important. And I think maybe that's something we should kind of think about at a program level as well. Just to better and more effectively communicate what we do and showcase our work.
If you look around in your own institution, I know that's true at Laurier, there are more and more resources and efforts being done towards a video, good video, and videos that tell really compelling stories. So those resources are growing and they are out there. The GWF videos that have put together have been tailored to partners. So what we've been doing is bringing together our overall concepts for GWF and the things we're working on together, but then also including details about the specific projects that are going on our institutions. So now the question you may have, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, is the videos that we are produced are tailored to USask, Waterloo, McMaster, and Laurier, and that's due to the institutional communications focus as well. So you may hear us talking about that. Your comms person that you work with, or the one at your institution, supports their institution, and we really want to foreground both GWF, but also all the partners involved.
And I guess just to kind of reinforce that, these are very professionally done videos. There can be some great expense associated with that, of course, but these are tools that can be available to anyone. I'm sure we all have very nice phones that have very good image captures and cameras on them. Those are tools that we can start doing some of this work and making all of this stuff more available, right? Like communicating doesn't always, I guess if we wait to have, polished videos, there's a lot of opportunities we're going to miss to actually deliver the stuff we do. And this could be smaller movies on social media, all sorts of different ways of communicating shorter videos or shorter blurbs about research, okay? Just to kind of help get your message out there.
There's some great examples out there. We have a short video of a researcher up north who is checking a stream monitor and out jumps some sort of creature. I think it's an otter or something. It's like 10 seconds long, and it's a fabulous video. So you don't have to have technical, very fancy equipment. You just have to have a compelling idea or a compelling story. This slide we're on now is about global water futures on Twitter. And the thing that I want to point out about this slide is if you just look at the tweets that are pictured here, there's effective uses of backdrops. There's consistent branding. You can see the GWF logo. There are field photos. There are people doing things in field photos that don't involve posing. They're actually interacting with their equipment. And there's also a lot of perspective in the panel presentation photo on the far right. For that one, you can see that, yes, Justin Trudeau is talking about these issues, but there's also flags, and you can see the person in the foreground is actually engaged in listening in what's going on. So not only does it show you the event, it shows you a context photo for it. So GWF has a huge following on Twitter. One of the things that your communications team at your different institutions are putting together is a list of Twitter accounts that are related to GWF across all the institutions, but also at your own institution, and related Twitter accounts. So these projects may not be directly GWF or fully funded by GWF, but they're working with GWF researchers. We're also tracking the young professional ones as well. So you may see us retweeting your projects and stuff. So why use Twitter for science outreach? Everyone has their own reason for using Twitter for science outreach, and you can see some examples here. Discovering jobs, peers. The thing that I want to point out about Twitter is a way of building these relationships, so the knowledge mobilization piece, but it's also a way to drive traffic to your communications projects and products. So if you have an article that you've written about your work, then tell people about it on Twitter and give them the link to where it is on a website so that they can go and read it in more detail. So Twitter can be used as a way to draw traffic to your communications products. Do you have any other comments on this slide, Andrew?
I am a big fan of Twitter. However, I do have to acknowledge it can occupy a lot of your time. But if you use it, you have to use it in a way that you're starting a conversation and you're really kind of asking people questions and tagging people and trying to bring more and more people into that conversation. I think it can be a very effective tool. But again, a lot of things with social media is you can get out of it but you got to put a lot of stuff into it as well. It's not doing it well actually can take a lot of time, and you have to really think about what you want to get out of it and how much time you have to put into it. You know, Twitter is one of those things. You know, Facebook is another thing. In the north, particularly where I work, Facebook is the social media channel of choice, and that's really content heavy. So you really have to think about how this benefits your communication and your knowledge mobilization plan and what you want to get out of it. Because, you know, again, it's a really powerful tool, but it's something you have to kind of think about as part of a plan that you come up with about what you want to do.
Sarah asked about getting published. We talk around about that around slide 36, so stay tuned. Some of the examples of content to post are publication or award announcements, posting updates about your research to, again, link back to your blog or your website, post pictures and videos about field or lab science, questions for other researchers, retweets of relevant science news or articles with your comment or your opinion, retweet from accounts that are relevant to your research interests, list upcoming events, opportunities, and courses, and live tweeting from conferences. I've also been on Twitter, and people are snowed in up north, and they're trying to figure out who's where and who's in town. So Twitter is used as a networking tool that way. So there's lots of ways to use Twitter. Next slide, please. So here are some Twitter accounts to follow. This looks like a huge list, but it's we have a resource that we're working on that will break it down a little bit too much, or a little into segments with what each one is. Some of these are institutional accounts. Some of these are project accounts. So there's lots of people on Twitter. And more importantly, it's lots of people involved in GWF on Twitter and people who are external to GWF as well who want to learn more about it. So you can reach both internal and external audiences through Twitter. Next slide, please.
So this is the slide.
Are we skipping it?
Yeah, but really we wanted to know kind of who uses social media here on the webinar. And more importantly, like, why do you use it? I know a lot of people have been interested in it, but maybe don't know where to start. Maybe people have a social media account but don't really use it. For myself personally, I use Twitter for my kind of work and research, but I used to use Facebook, but Facebook was more kind of personal stuff, and kind of finding the balance between the social media outlet that I used for work versus personal stuff, and trying to keep them separated. So again, it'd be great to have people throw something in the chat box about, you know, if they're on it, what they use it for, and any questions they might have about it. We've done a little bit of social media training here at Laurier to help HQP, I guess, tackle some of these problems, and we saw a really big jump in the amount of HQP who were actually using social media for research. But some people might just have, you know, concerns about not knowing what to do. But yeah, fire up those questions, and maybe we can see how we can help address them later on, or um, talk to your projects and talk to your institutions about getting training for that. It's a good way of identifying what you guys need to move forward. But there is no live polling today. I'm sorry. All right, Shawn, I think we're back to you. Turn off.
Thank you. If you are a graduate student at Laurier, I don't see what the institutional affiliations are of you. Come talk to either Andrew and I, and we will get you some training. Because again, people think that social media is something that perhaps HQP innately know something about because they're millennials or younger, but that's not true. So don't be afraid to ask for help in terms of setting up social media. And really, as Andrew said earlier in the presentation, listening before you engage in a conversation is very important in social media to really get an idea of what is going on there. You could even treat social media like a cocktail party. You don't just barge into conversations and start talking. You actually listen to what the topic of conversation is before you interact with folks. So we have lots of social media training and resources for you. And if you have worries about trolls or that sorts of things, or you've heard horror stories about social media, please come and talk to us, and we can help you navigate those sometimes murky waters. Photos?
I just want to chime in for 1 second. Mustafa was talking about having a blog, and blogs are really great for outreach and communications, and just because the way they're done, they're done in very plain language. They're very accessible. But again, I think the struggle is it's a big investment of time. And Mustafa, maybe you can comment on that, because it's not easy. It's taking your research, writing it in a more available format, and keep putting content out there. And I think that's what a lot of the problem that we run into is we have lots of demands on what we do, and so keeping generating all this content that's made for public consumption can be difficult, right?
Sarah made a comment about Twitter sometimes feeling like self-promotion. You're promoting your research and making people aware about your research. So yes, you are the person putting it forward, but people care more about your research, and it's a way of really taking all that work you've invested in doing your research and sharing it with others. So that may help you a bit with feeling a bit like you're self-promoting, or perhaps being very egotistical about it. But really, you're making people aware about your research, which is important. There was another comment here from how to manage your time in social media. So there is a slide coming up talking about where to put your content and where to share it, and that will help you a little bit with time management issues. But with all things related to the internet, it's a little bit addictive, and there are tools to help you with that as well. So getting back to photos. Photos are really important. There's a trend in institutional communications. If you look at the homepage of your institution, there are photos, there are videos, and that's where the internet is going. We mentioned earlier videos being very popular on the internet, and photos are another visual communications tool that is used a lot in institutional websites. So if you want your institution to write about your work, please have a good photo of yourself in the field or in business attire, and have a picture of your research or an idea of what sort of picture you could have about your research. If people are working in more social science areas or trying to explain concepts like food security, sometimes it's hard to get a photo. So really think about what photos would illustrate your work the best. And often if you're doing a lot of knowledge mobilization and you're working with community partners very closely, having pictures of you working together really enforces the point that people are interested to see what you have experienced and who you've experienced it with. Next slide, please. What makes a good photo? So here are some do's and don'ts. I'll concentrate on the don'ts just to move a bit faster. Don't have food and alcohol or unsafe practices, unclean lab spaces, and feed the animals. When you take a photo, have a look at what's in the background of your photo. Just double check that. Next slide.
Well, and the feed the animals was not intended just to be a joke, because some of us actually work in some pretty remote places where there are things that we should not be feeding. So yeah, but I guess back to the previous slide, just for a point there, is that a lot of the work that happens in Global Water Futures happens in some really amazing spots, and just capturing those places in a photo is really powerful and can really really reinforce a lot of the messages that we try to get across about the work that we do. So just, I know sometimes we don't always appreciate it because we're spoiled because we get to work in these places. But for the majority of people that we want to communicate with, they don't have these connections to these places. So we can help provide that with some of this communication and outreach that we can do.
GWF has a photo contest, so if you have taken these photos, please send them into the contest. And CERC also has photo contests where you can win money. So if you've gone to the effort of taking these photos, make them work for you and earn some money. Next slide. Here is an excellent photo example that your comms team will love. This person has the Canadian logo on them, they have the Laurier Golden Hawks logo on them, and they also have Laurier purple and gold in it. So wear gear from your university if you can in the field, and that will help you get better placement on the university website. Sometimes people wonder, well, what makes something get on the university website? It seems haphazard. Having good photos that are on brand with your institution will make your photos more compelling to be featured on your institution website. Next.
So we really want to turn this around to you guys on the webinar. A lot of communications and KM, I think, get put on the shoulders of other people. And there's a role that you can play as HQP, as researchers yourselves. We don't have to wait for other people to tell you how to come up with a comms plan or what it needs to look like. You can build your own, and you can actually play this role. Okay. So imagine how busy projects are and how busy we all are. But there's a role that you can play in capturing some of these communications pieces, taking pictures, taking photos, or movies, writing blurbs about what your research is, and then figuring out how you can use them, how your research project can use them, how your institution can use them, working together with a bunch of people to figure out where that message can go and how to get that message to people, okay? But really, it does start with each one of us, okay? And I think what we want to do now is Shauna has developed kind of a personal communications plan that I think we're going to discuss a little bit and figure out how each one of you can start getting involved in, I guess, more effectively communicating your research, but then looking for opportunities to build that communications into more relationships and knowledge mobilization.
Okay. The other screen that I'm looking at that tells me a slide ahead of what I'm supposed to talk about has just crashed. So I'll just be pausing a little bit between slides. So we'll make the resource available to you, and it's really to help you plan what communications you're going to do. And the first step is to figure out who you are trying to reach. So this isn't a checklist format for you to do to figure out if the people you're trying to share your research with are on this list or if you need to add someone. Next slide. After you've figured out who your audience is or the audience you would like to reach, figure out where they are. So what forms of communications are the folks from part 1 consuming? Are they online? Are they part of the media? Are they part of networks? And I've given you some examples below. So there's the Conversation, which is a online publisher of op-ed pieces by academics based on their research. There's the Guardian and other news outlets that post op-ed pages. There's people reading the newspaper. The one on the left-hand side, the tweet by Hannah Manns, this is a great way of reaching your audience. So she knows that the people that you're trying to reach are at the B2B marketing forum. So she's there to talk to them in person. But she also knows that people who are interested in what she's selling or what she's working on are also on Twitter. So she's taken a picture on Twitter to share what she's doing there on Twitter. So this is taking one project she's working on, attending a trade fair, and sharing it through 2 different forms of communication to reach the audience she's trying to reach.
I think an important point is if you don't know who your audience is, there are people you can ask. Okay? A lot of communication is about delivering the message to the recipient, and if you don't know who the recipient is, then your message isn't going to be effective. And this is what the comms team and also the KM team can do for you. Okay?
There was a question earlier about how communications and knowledge mobilization work together. And to be honest, a lot of that is really invisible to the GWF projects. We work together and we talk together all the time. So don't be afraid to talk to either one of your comms or your knowledge mobilization team, and we'll get your question answered. So that's helpful. The other thing about knowing who your audience is and who you want to try and reach is that once you reach them, you're getting feedback from them, and it's very gratifying to get feedback from an audience that they actually understand the research you're doing, or they actually want to give you that scholarship, or they actually want to engage with you in your work. So getting that feedback is really gratifying, especially if a lot of you are in the lab forever alone doing research. Another thing that's important is your key message. So what is the key message you want people to remember about your research? Next slide, please. Here are some examples of key messages that GWF has come up with. So for the audience of the Canada First Research Excellence Fund, so CFREF, that's a funder. The key message that they're giving to a funder is that GWF is the world's largest university-led water research project. So the key message is reinforcing the importance of this network to the people that fund it, because they want to get what drives this audience is they want to have a return on their investment. And they also want to support the first and the best. So being the largest is important to them. Another audience is academics, so collaborators in HQP or YP, the most cited freshwater research program in the world. So if you're involved with GWF, you're involved with the researchers that are prestigious in their field and have the most cited resources. The last one is the audience of Canadians reading the Globe and Mail. Canada is warming at twice the global average. So that message is meant to draw attention to global warming and GWF and speaking to the concerns of people who read the Globe and Mail. So all these key messages are targeted towards specific audiences. Now they seem very simple and short, but that does not mean they're easy to create. So work with your comms team or your KM team to really figure it out. And the resource we have for you has a few more steps in it for helping craft your key messages.
And just you know, finding out what key message works sometimes takes that relationship and kind of communication back and forth. Okay. So you see some of the key messages wouldn't resonate with some of maybe our smaller partners we have in the network. So how do you tailor your key message to what they need? Well, that's part of the KM process of understanding the needs of your end users and your partners. So you can see how there's one tool, but KM lets you reach a different audience than perhaps the communications team does, right? So again, Shawn and I work a lot together, but sometimes what we do on a daily basis can be different, and how that shapes the overall content of what the projects put out is reflected in those small differences in communications and knowledge mobilization.
And the knowledge mobilizer will also know who's missing from your list of audiences. So if they're involved in the project and they can see that a particular audience isn't getting spoken to or it's not resonating, the knowledge mobilization or the knowledge broker is on the ground to really find that out. And, community members or people who are involved in projects really are eyeball to eyeball with the knowledge mobilizers to say, here's what I need from you as a communications piece, so we can support each other in that way. The next thing to figure out is, what is your objective? So why are you doing this? Institutional specific resources are mentioned in brackets, but other projects are across institutions. For instance, enter the 3-minute thesis contest. That is something that happens at universities across Ontario, I think maybe across Canada too. So you can participate in these things to share your content with specific audiences. I also added a note here about your objectives. So you need to measure these things, and most of these tools have analytics built in. So if you share something on Instagram, there are tools to measure that. If you put out a podcast, there are tools to measure that. If you put a blog on Facebook or a Facebook post, there are tools to measure that. So really measure what you're doing so that you know it's working, because if it's not working, you probably want to try something else. And it's also really nice to make evidence-based decisions for that as well. Oh, okay. Be opportunistic. A lot of communications, especially when you're communicating academic research into the wider world, is taking advantage of things that happen in the wider world. So can your key message or your research be linked to specific events like flooding in Calgary, or a special day like Pink Shirt Day or World Water Day? One that just came up recently that really illustrates being opportunistic is a research team found a USB stick in seal poop while doing their lab work. And so they cleaned it, and they put the videos online to say, is this your USB stick? Now, I've never heard of the NIWA, but now I have. And this Twitter post was shared quite widely. So not only are you raising awareness about the research work you're doing on the scat of leopard seals, but you're also raising awareness in a way that's compelling for people. And I hope the people who own the USB stick find the information, and the story can continue. So it's a good news story, and being opportunistic are things that are important. One of the things that your institution has is a list of these special days that happen throughout the year, and they want to know about your research and how it can be linked for something or to something. So if the Olympics are coming up, if you're doing research related to that, they want to know about it. If there's a climate change summit coming up, they want to know how your research can relate to that. So be opportunistic when sharing your research. That will also help with the successfulness of it as well. Next slide.
Hold on, I'm just typing something.
Pardon?
I said I'm just typing something. I was going to talk. You can go ahead.
Okay. Raise your hand or something when you want to.
Yeah, no, there we go. Sorry, I just had to type a comment.
Olympics. It happened. Yeah. Well, there are water Olympics. So, okay, you're saying that funny, but do you remember when the Olympics were held in Rio de Janeiro and the water was so dirty and so polluted and so filthy that they couldn't hold their events, and athletes were refusing to participate in the games because they didn't want to get essentially poisoned by the water? If you're doing research into water purity or how to take contaminants out of water, you can link that key message to that story that's in the news. So yes, Water Olympics, but work with your comms team to find that link. We're a resource to you to do that. So what to share when you're sharing these things with your team? Send story ideas, abstracts, reports, posters. If you're attending a conference, tell us. If you're publishing a paper, tell us. Let your team know about research trips and conferences and share your success stories. Sometimes when a researcher submits a report to finance, because I'm in the same office as the finance, if they're on the photocopier and they're showing that 5 or 6 students presented at this amazing conference and they're photocopying it as part of finance backup, I can see that's something we should feature. We should feature those students going to that conference. It's something that was impactful to them. So don't underestimate who you share your success stories with on your team. Share them with everyone.
Yeah, and part of that team approach is that different people in that team can use that information for different reasons. Okay, like the KM team can have a different reason for it, or the comms team, the projects, the institution, Global Water Futures. Everyone can benefit from these products that you can all start producing. Okay, and it's just work with your team to figure out what the best fit is for different audiences. Okay, but really, again, it can start with you guys getting kind of empowered and organized to start getting some of this stuff, start producing some of this stuff to feed into that system. So why are we asking you to do this? Well, we want you to incorporate KM and comms as part of your own research plan, okay? So when you go to the field this summer, take a camera, make sure you've kind of thought about things you want to produce while you're in the field. And if you plan it, it's much easier to implement it as opposed to just, something you do later on and maybe wished you had planned in advance. Again, there's many people and groups who can provide assistance and support, okay? You're part of the biggest water-related kind of research team in the world. There's all sorts of resources, okay? Global Water Futures has provided so many resources to all the institutions that are a part of it that the time is kind of now to start this process. And it's a skill that everyone can benefit from, okay? Not only does it enhance your communication skills, and raise awareness about what you do as a researcher and raise your profile, it also raises the profile of the project, the institution, and Global Water Futures. Okay, we have this opportunity to make a huge impact in how Canada and Canadians manage this risk around water in this changing climate. And so some of this actually has to fall on your shoulders to better tell your stories. Okay, and this is where the KM team, the comms team, project managers, all sorts of people who you guys can talk to and rely on are there to help you, okay? And we can all work together to help identify these opportunities to build these comm projects and build them into relationships and help push all of these projects and all of your research, not only now, but as you continue your career as a researcher, to help foster better knowledge mobilization between yourself and your partners. Okay, that's really kind of where we wanted to end on this one, is this kind of call to action to all of you to start thinking about what training you need and what tools you have available, and figuring out with your team and your research groups and your projects how we can support you. Okay. So this slide really kind of shows both the KM team and the communications team. Every institution or of the 4 partner institutions has at least 2 people who are there to help you along this process. Okay. Many of us as well do HQP training or YP training around some of these issues to better build your skills as researchers. So if you want that to happen, ask, organize, okay? You all have YP groups. Organize with them, okay? This this can be some sort of choose your own adventure here, right? And if this is something you guys need to learn about, then engage, okay? And that's really the message that we wanted to get across today, is that there's a lot of tools that you can use right now if you wanted to start. And if there are tools that you lack or would like to develop, then start asking us, okay? And we're happy to look at opportunities to kind of provide those skills. Because, you know, if we get everyone on the same page communicating research, it benefits the whole network, okay? And I think that's where I wanted to leave off for today. Shawn, did you have anything you wanted to say in closing? Takes her a second. All right, Shawn's still on mute, but that's where I wanted to leave off today, everyone. So again, thank you. But if you want to have some questions that towards Shawn and I that we can answer right now, feel free to start putting them in the chat window, and we can discuss them. Alternatively, if there's some ideas that you want to post in there for some other skills that you want to learn in terms of communications or KM, feel free to post those as well. Again, I think we'll circulate a survey either today or I guess Monday's a holiday, so Tuesday, just to get some feedback on this as well. Yes, Stephanie Merrill says feel free to unmute and ask a question if you want to go live and talk to the world. So yeah, let's just leave it here for anyone to start asking questions.
Hi, this is Shauna. Sorry, I thought Stephanie was the only person who could unmute me. Yeah, I agree with what Andrew said. And do you want to go back one slide? And our contact information is all there.
Okay. On the link, sure. But you can also get us through the Global Water Futures website as well. And probably at this point you've heard from us a few times too. So a good question. So if you aren't part of the 4 core universities, who do we contact for this support? So each university will still have a communications group. KM is a little hit or miss depending on what institution you're at. Not all institutions have KM support. Shauna, maybe you know that better than I, but every university will have some communication support.
What institution are you at, Juris?
Hi there. Yeah, so I'm part of UNBC, but the project is like a collaborative project between UNBC, UCAM, USask, like several universities. So I've already asked help from Stephanie, and she's been excellent with communicating with me. So I'm just curious, like, who I should be going to, like, yeah.
So your university will have a comms team. They're the people that produce the stories for your website. Talk to them. UCAM is a member of Research Impact, which is a knowledge mobilization network, so you could connect through your UCAM connection there. I'm not sure if UNBC is part of Research Impact, and working through GWF as well.
Okay.
Hi, it's Stephanie. I was just going to add that to that question, it would make sense to identify if you're part of a Global Water Futures funded project as well, and identify the PI or the academic that is in charge of the project or the theme that you're participating in, and follow that link back to the university. And you definitely feel free to be in touch with the comms or the knowledge mobilization person that's associated with the institution that project is anchored under.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for training around things like doing a 3MT or that sort of thing, your graduate studies department will also have people that can train you with 3MT stuff. So I hope Mustafa, you had a good 3MT experience with that training.
Okay. Well, if there's no more burning questions, feel free to leave something in the chat box. If not, feel free to reach out to any of us listed here afterwards if you have any follow-up or have any ideas about any kind of training or any way that we can possibly help you. Feel free to do that, okay? But thank you all for joining today. Again, this will all be available online. You can watch the highlights later on. But thanks for taking the time for some of you over lunch and for some of you out of your day to sit and listen to us. So thanks a lot, everybody.